would have been understandable if some Greek or Romans, they thought they saw a god or a son of a god. I mean, all their stories were peppered with that. But for a bunch of Jewish boys to say that this is God incarnate, that this man is God, is one of the most unlikely things you could possibly imagine unless it was true.
This is the Land in the Bible podcast. Welcome to the Land in the Bible podcast, where we are in episode 8 of the Passion Week series. And today we are talking about the tomb.
And the resurrection, the fact that it's empty.
Well, I guess if we're saying locations, then the tomb is our location. Are we going to talk about today any of the possible tomb locations? We did do a little bit. Yeah,
we'll go into that a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about it. We'll set the stage.
I know you have a favorite.
Yeah, I have a favorite, and then I have the one I think is more likely. So
okay,
they're not necessarily the same.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's kick it off. What do you have for us today? How are we getting started?
All right. So let's go ahead and set the geographic site first. If you go on the tour of the Holy Land and you go to Jerusalem, you're going to see two candidate sites for the burial of Christ. The traditional site is Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and it has an incredible claim actually to being the place of Jesus' burial. The story behind it roughly goes like this. In around 300 AD, I'm ballparking it. I don't have notes from me. I should have. Constantine becomes the first Christian emperor. Shortly thereafter, whether or not Constantine was really a believer, it's up to you. I don't know. I'm not God. It seems that his mother really was, and that before he made it the legal religion of the empire, she was already a Christian. And so shortly after his conversion, he sent his mother, Helena, Saint Helena, goes to probably, I don't know if that's through the volcanoes after or not. But anyway, Saint Helena or Helena goes to the Holy Land, and she goes there with the purpose of identifying holy sites. And so she and sometimes in archaeology circles, she gets made fun of a little bit. They'll say she was the most successful archaeologist in all of history because she found everything she looked for.
Right.
Because basically her methodology was she'd roll into a town.
Yeah.
And she's the mother of the Emperor of Rome. So she would have hundreds or thousands of attendants and guards and, more wealth than any little town had seen in hundreds of years. And so she rolls into Bethlehem and she says, "So where was Jesus born? And I have a cash reward for whoever can help identify the site for me." Well, of course, the people don't want to displease her. They want to please her, and they would like a cash reward. And so, of course, everywhere she went, someone offered up, "It's right here. Look, here's the spot." And in some places, I feel like people told her true things. In some places, I think people did not so much tell her true things. They just told her something to make her happy, and hopefully she would move on.
Yeah.
And so you have to kind of parse that. Regarding the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, what happened is the bishop in Jerusalem at the time actually produced for her a document. So this is in about 300, and it was a document relating to what happened in about the middle of the 100s or 2nd century. And he told her when Jerusalem was rebuilt after the Second Jewish Revolt, that they built a temple. It was a Greek temple to Zeus or Apollo, whatever. They built it, I think Zeus, but they built a temple to a Greek god, a pagan temple, over the tomb of Christ. So Jesus was buried and resurrected in a certain spot, and that they built a tomb. They built the temple over it. And so the priest says, "Knock that temple down and you'll find the tomb." And since Christianity was now the religion of the empire, and she was free to do so, and she wanted to find the tomb, she orders the destruction of this Greek temple. And underneath they found they did find first century tombs. And there is no, I don't think anyone questions archaeologically that underneath in this location, some of them are still there and you can see them, that there are first century tombs. There are certainly there. There's no question about that. First century tombs were normally kind of like shelves carved into the rock. So think like a sort of a square hole, and then it goes back deeply into the rock, and you could insert the person, maybe with their feet down towards, farther away from you and their head toward you, sort of put them in feet first and into a hole like in a cliff face. Okay. So you're not digging straight down to the earth. You're digging horizontally into a cliff face. You sort of bore a shaft and you put the person into it. But what you have to understand about the land around Jerusalem is that there is no soft land there. Everything is limestone. Everything is really, really hard. Everything is rocky. So if you attempted to wait till grandma died to dig a tomb, you were going to have a big problem, because digging a tomb is going to take you a long time.
Yeah.
You have to think. You have hand tools. You have a chisel and a hammer, and you've got to tink, cut a little rock, scoop it out, do it again, do it again, do it again. It's going to take you a long, long time to dig that
Breaking
tomb.
out of prison in, I don't know, 100
yeah,
years
it's
ago.
like Shawshank or something. Yeah, it's gonna be a while. So that's not a good plan. And so families kept tombs prepared for when family members, died, and they would typically take the person, they would put them into the tomb, they would seal it, and then they'd wait about a year. They would reuse them. That's why when Jesus is buried, it says it was a new tomb that had never been used. That sounds very strange to us because we don't typically reuse tombs in the West, but they did because it was so difficult to dig in the stone there.
Yeah.
They would put the body in. They would give it about a year to decompose. They would come back. It would just be bones. They would put those bones into a box called an ossuary, and we have thousands of those that have been found by Israeli antiquities authorities. Like they're just they're kind of like a dime a dozen, as an archaeological thing. Like nobody cares anymore, but there's so many of them. But they would put the bones into a box, and that box only had to be as long as your femur, which is the longest bone. They would sort of stack them in there, and then you would sort of put that box aside, and you could reuse the tomb. And so any given family, hopefully you don't have a horrific tragedy and 8 people die in a year. Hopefully, you keep 2 or 3 tombs, and it works. And that was what was normally done.
Gotcha.
Now, if you look at those tombs that are still existent, they're still there. Sort of in the back of the building, there's a couple that you can get into. You'll see that they're not that big. They're pretty much just like a shelf, big enough that you could lay a adult human into it. Okay, so
and this location, is this the church?
Yeah. This is just sort of what typically happened, and then this is at the church. So at the Holy Sepulchre, at the sort of the traditional site. So if you're an ancient denomination, if you're Catholic, Greek Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox, Egyptian Coptic, then it's the site that you're going to recognize. Yeah. So this is there. They still have some of those. So Helena knocks it down. She goes underneath. She finds those. Well, that's pretty good archaeologically, because you have a document presented in the 300s about an event in the 100s stating, was written then stating that this is where it was. So, they're able to sort of kick the ball back farther than anyone else is. Mm-hmm. That, in sometime around 150, 170 AD, somebody said this is the spot. And so that's pretty good, and you sort of make that concession from the jump. It's actually quite good. The Holy Sepulchre Church was built around it. It was enormous, gigantic, much, much larger than the current church. So if you go now, it's a pretty big church built around the site. Mm-hmm. But the one that Helena built, the Byzantine church built there, was far larger. Some of the columns in the current church were actually columns that were in the ancient church that were cut in half in order to build the current one. So the earlier church was actually far, far grander and bigger and more monumental than the one we have now. Over history, you've had a succession of wars. The Muslims came in and conquered after the Muslim Arabs, and then after them the Turks conquered them, and then after them the Crusaders conquered them, and now you kind of go on. And with these successive conquests, you've had destructions. So Helena's church was destroyed by the Turks. Then you have the current reconstruction by the Crusaders, and so it's hard to sort of put it back together. And a part of what kicked off the Crusades actually is that the tomb of Christ that was still in existence, in the 600s, 7th century, was destroyed, basically ground to powder. So the current marker of the tomb is a modern, basically shrine, or it's built over where the site of the ancient tomb was, but there's actually nothing left of it because it was destroyed by the Muslims.
I was thinking, I was like, I don't remember seeing anything down when I went through there.
No, it's just like a bell sort of shaped thing, or like a little weird building inside the dome.
I remember seeing the building, and it's ornate.
There's nothing at all left
of
the ancient archaeology of that tomb. It was all destroyed in successive wars. So it's very difficult to verify that, but there are first century tombs all around there. Actually, it's in the wall. Some of the churches exist now. So it was clearly a place of burial. So that works, and it has the longest documentary history. So there's that. The other possibility is the garden tomb.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I stated in the crucifixion episode that I actually like the garden tombs. If I have to bet on where these things took place, I think the garden tomb's place of execution, if I have to bet, is the right one. If I had to bet money, I would bet on the Holy Sepulchre being the place of burial, just because how far back they can, push the ball. I hope it was the garden tomb because I like it better. And I'm sure a lot of that has to do just with my being a Protestant Christian, and I'm Western, and so it appeals to me more than a Greek Orthodox building does.
How far apart are they from each other?
Oh, they're quite close, I would say. If you could draw a straight line, which you can't today, probably a quarter mile, a half mile at the most, but maybe less than that.
I know they're like, I remember them being like on the same kind of side.
Yeah, and the biblical text says that the tomb was close by to the place of execution, but we know close by is.
I mean, that would be really close by the garden tomb and the
50 yards.
Yeah, that would be really close.
Yeah, it was really, really close by. But close by, like, I don't know what does that mean? It's such a subjective term that it doesn't. We weren't given 323 meters. We weren't giving anything exact at all. So the question is, what was close by to someone in the first century? I don't know. You make your guess.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I really, really like the garden tomb is because for me, if I want to have a prayerful devotional moment, it's quiet. It works as a place of prayer and devotion for me. And I also like it because if it is not the tomb of Christ, and I already said I've had to bet on the other one, but if it's not the tomb of Christ, there is not a single thing about it that violates the narrative of the story. And so that makes you think like, ugh, how many tomb places were there that exactly fit the story so well?
Mm-hmm.
So, it's the tomb of a rich man. Well, clearly it was the tomb of a rich man because it's quite large. It's not just a shelf dug into the ground. It's got a full-size door, and it goes, you can walk into it. And then there's, to the right, there are places of burial, and the fact that it's to the right matters because one of the accounts of the resurrection says that Peter looked to the right and saw that he wasn't there. So the fact that it's not straight in, like almost all tombs was, but the fact that it enters and then breaks right, very unique, and it's there. It was a Rolling Stone tomb. We see that. It was there are so many things about it that fit the narrative. It's like, well, if it's not the right one, it's an absolutely spectacular visual aid.
Yeah.
And it might be. I kind of hope it is because I just prefer it, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
So that's.
So let me ask just a historical question. So Helena.
Yeah.
What?
We're
on first name basis.
Yeah.
Helen.
As you like.
So she did identify through her travels and duties.
The current side of the Holy Sepulchre Church.
Right. She identified that one. So how did the garden tomb come about as an option?
A British soldier was sort of hanging out on the wall. He noticed that there was a cliff face that looked somewhat like a skull. And he's like, I wonder if that's, the place of the skull, Golgotha. They commissioned some archaeology to be done around there. They did find some evidence of executions. And then later in further digging, they found the tomb, which is today.
So all that was dug out.
Late 1800s, early 1900s, about a century ago, maybe a little more.
Okay,
so, which is much later, So that's what you have to contend with. Like, do you really think because the cliff looked like a skull that you're able to find a place that much later? It's it seems a little fanciful some way, that part of the story, but maybe.
Cool.
Who knows?
Gotcha.
So that sort of sets up the actual physical location, and again, it's in a garden. Garden means agriculture, not pretty flowers. Of a rich man, the thing there is of a rich man. So you kind of get the gist of it in a tomb that was new, that had a rolling stone that opened to the right. So that's how it physically looked. What I want to focus in on today is, what does the resurrection mean? So I grew up. I'm a child of the 80s. I'll give my age away here. I was born in 74. So, so as of today, as I sit here, I'm 47. I'm sure people will be listening to this, years and years from now. But anyway, as of right now today, I'm 47 years old. And, when I was 8, 10 years old, when I was sort of getting old enough to pay attention to the world, was the era of the great rivalry between the Celtics and the Lakers in basketball. Mm-hmm. So I grew up
Larry Legend
loving NBA basketball.
Right.
And, for years, the whole NBA season was just like, okay, so the Celtics and Lakers are going to win their divisions, and they're like, what matters? This is all just prelude to eventually the Celtics and Lakers. These two teams will get together, and that's going to be interesting. Everything else is just, can we get there?
Yeah.
And yes, everybody picked. You either liked the showtime, the glitz, the glamour, the transition. If you like that of the Lakers, or you like the gritty, tough, will knock you down of the Celtics. I was a Celtics fan, so I loved Larry Bird. And Larry Bird was famous for calling his shot. Like Larry Bird, crunch time in a game, down one with a few seconds to go.
I'm going to go over here and I'm going to hit this shot in your face.
That's right. I'm going to catch the ball right there. I'm going to take 2 dribbles to that spot right there, and I'm going to bank it.
Yeah.
And, he would just tell the guy and then do exactly what he said and walk off like, thanks for playing. He was famous for doing that, for sort of calling his shot. And the thing about calling your shot is, if you hit it, it's really cool. If you miss it, you're really dumb. It's just, if you're walking around being like, Muhammad Ali was famous for the same thing. He would say I'm going to knock you out in the 5th round or something like that. Well, if you do it, then you're Muhammad Ali or you're Larry Bird.
I was actually watching a video this morning of the 1932 World Series where Babe Ruth called his shot.
Yeah.
I actually watched.
He called the home run?
Watched it this morning, yeah.
Yeah. So if you do it, you're Babe Ruth, you're Larry Bird, you're Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
If you say that and then you don't, well, you're not, And the proof is in the pudding. Okay. You called your shot. Make it or don't. And Jesus spent a lifetime, if you would, calling a shot. I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to be beaten and crucified by the priests. And on the 3rd day, I'm going to rise again. He said it over and over again.
Yeah.
It's weird that the disciples never really believed him when he said it. Like they thought it was symbolic or hyperbolic or something. But he constantly said it. So he called his shot, And so, okay, well, let's see if it happens. And really, I was, kind of looking some of this up. Jesus Not only does he sort of call his shot, this is going to happen. I'm going to go to Jerusalem. This is going to happen. I'm going to come back, and that's going to prove who I am. But he said lots of crazy things about who he am. Now, if you're just honest about Christ as a Christian,
mm-hmm.
He both taught crazy things and made crazy claims. I think that's just unavoidably true. So you have to think, like, he stands up at the Sermon on the Mount and he says, love your enemies, bless those that curse you. If you look at a woman to lust after her, you've already sinned. You should. And he says all this stuff, and you're like, you're crazy. Nobody can live like that. What's wrong with you? And then Gethsemane and the cross are him living out those teachings their fullest. No, watch, I can love my enemies. No, watch, you can give that much. Okay, that sort of validates that. And the resurrection is what validates his claim. So the cross validates his teaching that you can live out those things he taught to the ultimate. I'm not saying it'll be easy or pleasant all the time, but you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the tomb validates, his claim. So what are some things he claims? First off, if you read Luke 4, Jesus is teaching in the synagogue at Capernaum, and it says that the crowd was astonished because he taught with authority. Well, here's what that meant. Okay. He taught with authority, and you see this in the Sermon on the Mount. So Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Jesus would say things on a regular basis. He would say things like, well, Moses said, but I tell you, and he would adjust, change, extend, I would say mostly extend Scripture. So Moses said Moses is trying to protect women. And so he says, well, you have to give a woman a contract to divorce her. He's trying to put a little constraint on it. Jesus is like, no, I'm going to extend it beyond that. You can only divorce your wife if she's been unfaithful physically. So he's extending, he's going beyond. And you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, but I tell you, and he goes into talking about, extending grace and mercy to people that deserve justice. And so he's teaching, I'm sure, in that sort of vein. And he's teaching with authority, meaning I have the authority to adjust this. Well, you would not accept that from any current pastor or preacher of a church. If your pastor or preacher does that, you should leave.
Right.
If he says, well, the Bible does say this, but actually I've got a better idea. Well, he doesn't have the authority to do that. Jesus taught with authority. What validates that? How do you think you have the right to correct Moses? That seems very presumptuous of you. What happens in the story in Luke 4 is that Jesus is speaking. Everybody's saying, like, it says they were astonished because of this. And then a demon begins to, manifest, and he casts the demon out. And then they're like, maybe we can command demons. I don't know. We're willing to hear him. But ultimately, that wasn't enough. He'd be more. He forgives sin. Okay. So you got stories like when the story of the lame man being let down through the ceiling. It's in Matthew 9, if you want to look at it, where he sees the guy and he says, your sins are forgiven. And then it says, well, and as a bonus, I'll heal you too. But only God can forgive sins. Mm-hmm. Who gives this guy the right to forgive a sin? So he can adjust the Scripture. He can forgive sin. He refers to himself as the Son of Man. That's a direct reference. I mean, I'm also the Son of a Man, but I'm not the Son of Man.
Right.
Which is a reference.
Messianic reference.
Absolutely, yeah, right. To a prophecy in Daniel. Yeah. So he's saying, like, I'm the one who's like a Son of Man, but really I'm from God. Clearly a claim to messiahship.
Mm-hmm.
So he makes that claim. He accepted, like on the triumphal entries, right? Example of this. He accepted praise and worship. If people, later in the Bible, like in Acts, people start trying to worship, Paul as a god after he healed. He's like, whoa, no. I'm a man just like you. When they get disillusioned and try to kill him, But Paul is not going to accept praise and worship, nor should any human. But Jesus did. The only way that that's justified is if he's God. If he's a human, he's awful. Okay? One of the biggest claims that he makes, just out there, just like, huh? Is in John 8, 56, 59. He said, he calls himself I am. He says, when Abraham was, I am. Well, that's okay. That's a claim to eternity that I am when Abraham was. That's some crazy stuff going on there. But he did say that.
Mm-hmm.
He made the claim, which is clearly a claim of deity. The exact quote goes something like this. He says, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. So Abraham rejoiced. Well, already the timeline's a little funny there. He saw it and was glad. And it says the Jews replied, you aren't 50 years old yet. You've seen Abraham? And Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. And the crowd clearly knew the claim he was making, because the next verse says, so they picked up stones to throw at him. So they tried to kill him right then, like, you're going to kill you for that. That's blasphemy. So he makes these really, really big claims over and over again. Eventually at his trial, when it all comes down to it, they're making accusations, they're saying this, they're saying that. He's not really responding. Nothing's really sticking. They have no grounds really to kill him. They just kind of want to. And finally, this is what goes down in Matthew 26, 63, 66. It says, the high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. And then Jesus replies, and he says, you have said it, but I tell you in the future, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. So he affirms their claim that he's the Son of God, and then makes further claim to the title of Son of Man, and says, and you'll see me coming on the clouds of heaven. And again, they knew exactly what the claim was. And it says, in the high priest tore his robes and says, he has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? See, now you've heard the blasphemy. What is your decision? And they answered. So the high priest says, you've seen and heard it. And they all answered. The chorus of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish high court, was, he deserves death and he's taken out to be killed. So you've got all these claims. So you just take that as the background. Claims of deity, claims of messiahship, claims to be able to do things, on and on. I want to focus on a moment that we pass often. And it's a moment, so now we're sort of punting back to the upper room. But there's an interaction that happens there. And it goes something like this. I'm reading from the Luke account. Jesus gives instructions to his disciples. He says, tell the owner of the house, the teacher asked you, where is the guest room where I can eat the Passover with my disciples? Then he will show you a large furnished room upstairs. Make the preparations there. So just to make the point, he's sending his disciples to find a place to have the Passover. Verse 13 says, so they went and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. Hebrew, it's Pesach, just so you'll know. You have to learn how to go if you want to be able to speak Hebrew. They prepared the Passover. Verse 14, it says, when the hour came, he reclined at the table, and the apostles with him. Then he said to them, I have fervently desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. So like Luke makes it really clear that this is the Passover meal. And he says, for I tell you, I will not eat it again until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of heaven. Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he said, take this and share it among yourselves. For I tell you, from now on, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine till the kingdom of God comes. And he took the bread, gave thanks, broke it, and said to them, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Now, I want to hang on that quote there. Understand the setting. You're in the upper room. You're with the disciples. You're doing the Passover meal. they're breaking the bread. And the quote is, "Do this in remembrance of me." I grew up in a church that had that written on like an altar at the front. This do, I think it was probably the King James formulation, "This do in remembrance of me," was written right there on the front, on the little table where the bread and it was grape juice back in those days. I couldn't drink wine, but, sat in the front. So I read that sentence, on Wednesday nights and twice on Sundays for years and years of my life. And it's just a sentence, "Do this in remembrance of me." And it's just pounded into your head, and you're like, you do the communion, you do it in remembrance of Christ. Okay, fair enough, move on. And we have no idea how utterly fantastic a claim he's making there. We don't think about it. You got to think, Jesus is sitting there in a room full of Jewish young men. Going back to Moses, 1,400 years prior, Jews had been instructed once a year to do the Passover. And the Passover was done year after year after year so that they could remember that God had redeemed them out of bondage in Egypt. So when you did the Passover, you were to remember, the whole point of the reenactment was to remember God's redemption from Egypt that came through Moses. And really that act establishes the entire Jewish system, the system by which you sacrifice lambs for remission of sin, and everything, like the Passover is really like the linchpin it all hangs on. It's super, super important, right? And Jesus is looking at them and saying, from now on, when you do this, remember me. He's making a clear claim to displace Moses. Don't think about Moses. Moses, he saved you from Egypt. That was nice. But he was just a foreshadowing of me. When being saved from slavery in Egypt, again, that was nice, but being saved from your sins eternally, it's a lot bigger deal. It's what I'm doing for you. He's making a claim to a room full of Jewish boys to forget about what Moses did and remember me. Well, that's craziness. That's insanity. Unless you hit the shot. And so, to me, everything that he said, everything that he claimed comes down to the resurrection. And one of the things I think that validates Jesus so much is that the least likely group of people to call a human God was a set of Jewish boys. They've been trained all their lives against idolatry and paganism and against those kind of things. Like for a bunch of pagans, Paul goes into, some random village, in present day Turkey and heals somebody. And next thing you know, they're like, "You're Zeus and he's Apollo." And they're like, "Oh," but, so it would have been understandable if some Greek or Romans, they thought they saw a god or a son of a god. All their stories were peppered with that. But for a bunch of Jewish boys to say that this is God incarnate, that this man is God, it's one of the most unlikely things you could possibly imagine unless it was true. And the only way that these guys who then, I like to sort of hang around and engage in the, we haven't talked about my real job at all.
Yeah, but, we should do that. We should. You don't just make podcasts for a living.
No, I do. I work overseas. I serve the Lord in foreign countries. So,
so far you're a career missionary, right? Is that a way to say that? That word.
Not a super fan of that word, but that's in America. In America, it's the easiest way to.
You work for the Lord overseas. It's just what does that mean?
Yeah. So as a part of that, I spend a lot of time engaging with people who don't believe with the Christian story, whether they're atheists or members of other religions maybe. And one of the great points that I think is utterly inexplicable outside of the Bible being true is to explain the origin of Christianity. Like, why did these followers of Christ, why did these young men and other people that were around them go out into the world perfectly willing to die horrific deaths, standing on the claims Jesus made that he was the Messiah, he was the Son of God, he does replace, and he effectively replaced Moses too, by the way. I doubt that anyone listening to this on Easter time gives very much thought to Moses, So why was he effective in that? Why were his disciples effective? Because why were they willing to sacrifice so much? Because they really believed it. Because they had seen a risen Savior. He called that shot and then made it. I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to be beaten and whipped and crucified by the high priest, turned over to the Romans, and then I'll come back. His claim about the temple, which is obviously really about himself. I will be destroyed in 3 days, rebuilt. Like, he made those claims over and over again, and then he did it. And when you see a guy that was killed in the most vicious way you can imagine, and there are some people who, I think have, I'm not saying that they're fools, but the theory is utterly ridiculous. Yeah. Well, these people now that sort of have this theory, like, well, maybe the Romans missed. Like they almost killed him, and then they put him in the tomb and he woke up. Well, if that had happened, well, first off, it didn't happen. Okay, first off, the Romans were incredibly efficient killers. Like, they knew when you were dead,
right?
And they did things to verify your deadness. You've been crucified, hanging on a cross for several hours. And before that, you were beaten, half your skin was already ripped off anyway. And then you're hanging on the cross for a long time until you're dead. But, just to be sure, would you quick stab him real quick? I mean, you don't recover from that,
right?
But even in some sort of crazy, fantastical world, if you did,
it's not 3 days later.
And you're going to be in just the rest of your life a beaten,
right,
injured pulp of what you had been. And no one is going to mistake you for a glorious resurrected anything.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to hide you somewhere and, whatever. But they're not going to give their lives because you're God. The belief of the apostles that these claims were true is one of the most important things in all of human history. Because how do this many people believe that to that point? And to me, it's probably the single best argument, for the veracity of Christianity is the testimony of these guys. And they clearly believed it was true. And they clearly accepted the claims he made and went to their deaths for them. So to me, like, what is the importance of the tomb? The importance of the tomb and of the resurrection and the fact that it's empty is that it validates everything.
Mm-hmm.
If there's no resurrection, then there's no point in following Jesus. Like, why would you follow somebody who just lied? And, he's like, if there's no resurrection, then, he's the guy at the end of the bench that couldn't back his claims up. He's not Michael Jordan or Larry Bird at that point. He's a loser. Why would you follow him? He's a liar, or crazy. That's the sort of the C.S. Lewis formulation, right? Liar, lunatic, or Lord.
Yeah.
But he's not anything worth following. If he did come to life, that's a different question. And so to me, at the end of 8 episodes of walking through that week and everything that happened at the end of his life, and really his whole life, you have the moment where, hope breaks in. All of us will experience death. It's unavoidable. It's undesirable. I don't want to do it. I don't want to go there. And the reality is, so will everyone I know and love, and so will my kids. It's pervasive. So how can we live life with hope? Well, because Jesus was resurrected and said, if you follow me, you will be too. Okay. I believe that, I mean, I know people think you're crazy and foolish, but I believe that. And so I can live according to it, and I can have faith because he backed his claim. So to me, that's why it's like, it's the great yay moment after all the heaviness that went before in the week. Yeah,
no, for sure. And, I've heard that explained before, and it's.
Did anybody else use Larry Bird as a part of their?
No, that's the first time. I'm just trying to think about what I can say. You're breaking new
ground theologically.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I like that. Like, you called the shot, and Bird was the man. He called his shot. I like it. It's a great parallel that you drew there. Huge Celtics fan, obviously.
I grew up that way.
Yeah, and I think, to tack on to what you were saying about the disciples and why do these guys believe it? And it is because they saw it, right? It's not just that we have belief. I mean, we and other religions, you do things because of what you believe, but they did things because of what they saw too.
Yeah.
And the resurrection being the event that it was, they experienced it. So I think that's
it's hard to see something and think this human is a God and I should give my life to proclaim that. That's not something that happens to a large group of people on a regular basis.
Right.
So there is something. If you're a skeptic, you've got to deal with that. Like, how do you explain that thing?
Yeah.
Because that's a tough one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, is that it for this one?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. And then we've wrapped this series up.
Yeah.
The Passion Week is wrapped. What do you think? Any big takeaways from this series that you hope people got, or what?
Well, I mean, I hope Jesus's capacity to love and care while going through horrific things, I think is so utterly unbelievable. Because we typically use our pain as a opportunity to opt out on helping other people.
Right.
And to me, that's one of the big takeaways. Also, I hope you leave it really thinking honestly through who you are. Not seeing yourself as Jesus in the story, but our understanding that you're also the crowd that gets disappointed and acts out on that, and you're Peter, James, and John sleeping through an opportunity, and sometimes you're Judas and you sell somebody out. Like, understand that, but that what Jesus did for you gives you grace and forgiveness, even though you are the bad guys in the story. And also, just so you'll know, it's not your story, it's his. You're a character in his story. It's not yours.
Yeah.
I think those may be the two big ones.
Yeah. That's really good. I mean, I definitely like the idea of looking at all these characters and thinking about who you are, not Jesus, but all the other people we've talked about in this series. I mean, I think for me, the Peter's denial, the Gallicantu episode was really like kind of hit me between the eyes, because I'm like, how often in our life we're not out there denying Jesus, but we are standing. Maybe we're standing over here on the side, just in the crowd, like behind someone,
not willing to step up.
Yeah, because you don't have to a lot of times, And it's like, okay, and then it does escalate. Maybe someone's like, no, it's not me. It's not me.
Yeah, so maybe one day, you sit here thinking of things we covered, things we didn't cover. You can't cover everything, I mean, there's been thousands of pages of ink spilled over these topics. One that we didn't talk about was Pontius Pilate, and we didn't really go into him at all. But there's this wonderful moment there or not wonderful, it's awful, but it's poignant, I guess is the way to say it, where he says, what is the truth? What is truth?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's so interesting because I feel like that's a place where our society is now, where, basically postmodernist thinking, which has taken over a lot of our culture, says exactly that there's no way to know truth. There is no truth, where Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the light, that there is truth and I am the truth. Whereas this guy's like, what's truth? It's not even a real thing,
Right.
And we think we're so current and we're so modern. We have a new idea when you really don't, Maybe we'll do a bonus episode on that one day or something. I don't know. But there's so many things about the story that just apply.
Mm-hmm.
They just apply. So
that's great.
Yeah, I'm glad we got to go through it.
Yeah, maybe we should do like a character series. Just pick like 5 or 8, 6. I don't know. You pick the number.
Oh, cool.
Just characters, and we just hit that. We do some stuff like
bonus
characters.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, that is it for this series, and hope everyone enjoyed it. And as always, if you want more content like this and on other topics, go to thelandinthebible.com and check it out. And we'll see you again soon.
Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, click like and subscribe. It really helps us. And if you really enjoyed it, go on over to our website, thelandinthebible.com, and become a supporter. It helps us generate more content and gives you access to our full library of video and Bible study content.